6 years after the release of Metro Last Light, 4A Games are back with their most ambitious entry in the cult favourite shooter series yet. The past two titles followed Artyom and his struggles to survive in the metro tunnels under Moscow after a nuclear war destroyed the surface, offering a new spin on the post-apocalyptic subgenre as a whole, closer to something like a hardcore sim like Stalker rather than the fantastic futuristic fun of Fallout. Exodus, however, is leaving those dirty old tunnels behind, instead opting for a semi-open world experience as Artyom, his wife Anna, and a bunch of Spartan Rangers travel east on a train looking for the perfect spot to start their new life. It's a marked change for fans of the franchise, and the game itself is bigger and more detailed than the last two titles and their DLCs combined, but is the new direction enough to break Metro out of the niche it's been comfortably sat in for near a decade now? In my opinion, it should be, but it should also be noted that Exodus makes a goddamn terrible first impression. There's a lot of hoops the game has to jump through in the first hour or two to get these characters out of the metro and into the wild. From a story perspective, even if you play the other games, you can feel completely lost as the sequel tries to get you up to speed after an admittedly stellar opening sequence. From here, you're funneled into one linear set piece after the next as control is completely wrangled away from you and you're forced into rote combat encounters that just never seem to end. It doesn't help either that the game does a pretty poor job of explaining how it works, with mechanics having to be felt out for yourself if you miss the very quick prompts that introduce them all. This opening just doesn't reflect the experience at all, and it might put players off until they get to the game's proper opening out in the first open world area. The first impression of gameplay might be bad, but from a visual perspective at least, the jump to the surface allows 4A's graphics engine to totally shine. I was playing on the PlayStation 4 Pro, and whether you're boating your way through thick fog and icy water of the game's winter chapter or exploring the lush green forests in the spring, it's striking just how gorgeous the studio's take on post-apocalyptia is. The monsters themselves are already terrifying, but when they're silhouetted against the title's incredible lighting system, basked in shadows or blinded by a flashlight, there's an inescapable atmosphere of pure dread the game thrives on. The visuals would be nothing if the new Sandbox areas themselves weren't well designed though, and Metro more than justifies its move from linear corridor shooting to a series of expansive, self-contained locations. In the narrative, Artyom has spent almost his entire life underground, and these areas really nail the sense of discovery and wonder these characters feel exploring the surface properly for the very first time. It can, however, sometimes feel like the devs relied a bit too heavily on tried and tested tropes when it comes to the game's visual design. The metros of old games weren't exactly easy on the eyes, but they were unique to the game's story, a setting which is now being sandwiched between the likes of deserts which look like they've been ripped straight out of Mad Max. Exodus's aesthetics generally owe a debt to other giants of the subgenre, but there is a level of detail the studio have brought to everything that retains the distinctive Metro vibe players gravitated towards in the first place. Each area isn't massive, but they're big enough where you can lose hours just wandering around, exploring, and stumbling across the stories of people who weren't as lucky as you. As is the Metro way, HUD and UI elements are kept to a minimum, with the most vital information being conveyed through in-game actions and counters. You have to check your watch to view how long your gas mask filters have left, for instance, or whip out an in-game map to see where the hell you're actually going. It can be cumbersome, but it engrosses you into the world in such a subtle way. You're always engaging with the environment rather than simply following a waypoint or checking screens like in other games. That can lead to some occasional problems, for instance wasting a lot of time investigating areas that will later be used for story missions, or starting one of these said story quests before you finish exploring and then being ushered into the next area, but they are worthy sacrifices in my eyes. The smaller space of these areas allows for a denser environment to navigate overall, and there's always the thrill of climbing to the high ground, whipping out your binoculars and spotting your next destination to check out, all without the game prompting you to do any of it. Similar to releases like Breath of the Wild, it's more about the journey to these locations that's the draw rather than the destination itself. The major structures and encampments are always visually inspired and can contain some great loot, but it's the subtle differences in how players survived long enough to get there in the first place that will come to define the Exodus experience. This world is really unforgiving, and getting from A to B isn't as simple as holding sprint and following a waypoint. The dynamic weather might throw a storm your way, you might stumble across a monster's den, or you might spend 15 minutes trying to figure out how to get from one side of a mutated fish river to the next without being Jaws to death. It's these little speed bumps that keep you playing, and they more than justify Exodus's switch to wide linear levels because they make the previous title's tight focus on survival even more compelling. Which is great because the vast majority of your time in Metro Exodus is going to be spent scavenging and exploring rather than engaging in combat. The actual crafting systems themselves are pretty standard. You can whip out your backpack while out exploring in order to create the essentials, items like medkits, filters, molotovs, and certain ammo types, while an actual crafting bench is needed to tinker with items more extensively. Here you can modify your weapons, sometimes morphing them into a different class entirely, choose your loadout, and change your armor configuration. Consequently, rather than blowing monsters' heads off, you're going to find yourself spending a lot of time scouring the floor for boxes and spamming square to hoover up the resources and crafting items around you. Everything in the game is trying to kill you, even your own weapons and armor, which are practically held together by sticky tape. Guns already have limited amounts of ammo, but extended use makes them dirty, which in turn makes them jam, which in turn allows a mutant to swoop in and disembowel you. Everything needs constant maintenance, but that preparation does make the times when you can unload your pristine weapons in a hectic firefight all the more earned. It's a loop that kind of perfectly balances making the player feel powerful when they put the time into scavenging, while also retaining a sense of peril and improvisation when resources are running low and you have to fend for yourself. Fortunately, for the most part, the actual combat itself is solid enough to justify all that prep. All of the weapons pack a punch and hit with a satisfying kick. Battling human soldiers is relatively straightforward as you take cover and take pot shots while trying not to take any fire. There are always multiple ways to tackle each encounter as well, with the game often letting you decide whether or not you want to strike from the shadows or go in guns blazing. What is frustrating though, and what also plagued the previous games, is how rudimentary these stealth sequences can feel at times. Enemies are either brain dead, not spotting you when you're mere meters away from their stupid faces, or hyper aware, calling an entire fortress down on you in a flash. Despite having a light meter on your wrist that informs you when you're in view, you never totally know when you're at risk of being seen, and a dedicated audio cue doesn't do all that much to add more clarity to the situation. And even if it all did work, there's very little innovation in the actual mechanics. You're still performing stealth takedowns, getting silent headshots, and relying on throwing knives to sneak by undetected. It's all solid, but if you've played any other open world game with stealth elements, you know exactly what you're getting. And it's a shame that 4A once again let down by this area. Thankfully, it's fighting the mutated monsters where the game really shines anyway. From humanoid mutants to terrifying winged creatures that swoop down from the sky, whether they come in packs or are on their own, there's a dangerous sense of unpredictability that comes with tackling each and every one of them. Being swarmed by a horde of mutants as your gun's jamming and you're down to your last Molotov is always a rush and gets the heart pumping in a way that regular firefights simply don't. That's probably down to the tension that precedes each and every one of these encounters though, is seeing the shadow of a monster overhead or being surprised when a creature you thought was dead pops back up to life comes with a palpable level of dread that just makes it so goddamn engrossing. However, while the game is intentionally weighty and methodical in its movement and action, combat can sometimes feel a little bit sluggish. Aiming never quite feels as precise as it should, while on the PS4 Pro anyway, it can sometimes feel like there's a slight delay in your inputs. Combine this with monster AI that sometimes bugs out, and firefights can occasionally become clumsy affairs. Of course, while you spend the bulk of your time fighting and exploring on your own, everything you accomplish feeds back into the small community of people back on the train. Acting as your home base, the train is a hub between sandboxes where you can freely explore, interact with the people on board, and check out your diary. Similar to Red Dead Redemption 2, it's made clear that this group is what you're fighting for, and you do genuinely come to care about each person on board and the stragglers you pick up along the way. They aren't just faceless strangers, you see them acting like real people, having a laugh with each other, playing music, and falling in love. These sections offer you a glimpse of what you're really fighting for, a home where humanity can still thrive. Unlike Red Dead Redemption 2, however, Exodus doesn't quite have the script or the voice acting talent to back this up. Some standout sequences, like a group sing-along midway through the game, really resonate, but sometimes you can spend 5 minutes listening to someone drone on and spout exposition before realizing they're not really saying anything at all. People just talk at you for minutes at a time as they pace backwards and forwards, and that would be fine, but Artyom is a mute protagonist, a feature which feels incredibly dated in 2019. For such a story-driven game, making the main character mute can make the already wonky dialogue feel even more unnatural. It transforms conversations into pure exposition dumps. Anna in particular suffers from this, constantly telling him how much she loves him and having long-winded conversations that are entirely one-sided. It's an odd choice, especially because he narrates the loading screens anyway, so just get him to speak. Just make him speak. The problem with this delivery seeps into the story itself as well. As a narrative, Metro Exodus is great, offering up interesting characters as they embark on this year-long journey into the unknown. But the actual way the story is told and conveyed takes something away from its impact. Compounding this are the many bugs and glitches littered throughout the game as well. Visual hiccups are everywhere as environmental details and whole enemies pop up out of nowhere. Hitboxes were sometimes an issue as well, as shots wouldn't register and occasionally enemies wouldn't react to my presence at all. These are frustrating but ultimately negligible, something which can't be said for the few hard crashes I did encounter throughout my journey. Exodus is ambitious, but sometimes you get the feeling that the tech couldn't quite handle 4A Games' vision, and there's an overall lack of finesse and polish which unfortunately takes you out of this world that the mechanics, gameplay and visuals do such a good job of immersing you into. Overall then, Metro Exodus is a deeply flawed game, yet one which I couldn't help but loving every step of the way. Even when it was frustrating and I literally wasted 40 minutes of my time trying to get out of a train car because no prompt was there and I still have no idea how I actually did it, there's something about 4A's world and gameplay loop that's so immersive and engaging. It's not quite the Witcher 3 moment for the series that I was expecting, and not everyone is going to be on board with how goddamn obtuse it is, but it's a grand step forward and worthy of 4 stars out of 5. So that's my thoughts on Metro Exodus. I'm a huge fan of this franchise. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Are you looking forward to the game? Have you not played the other ones? And will you be giving this one a try? And while you're down there, can you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more list news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, you've been watching What Culture, and I'll see you soon. Bye.